Okay, so yesterday, guys, we talked about moving around the unit circle with degrees. So the directions would say solve, and it would give you from 0 theta all the way to 360, right? Today, so we're not going to do that today. Today we're going to actually solve, and the directions will say for 0, and instead of theta, we're going to do x, meaning radians, from 0 to 2 pi. So the first thing you need to make sure that you do is when you see x, or 0 to 2 pi, you need to put your calculator in radians. That's an important step, okay? The calculator needs to be in radians. And then if you want to think about it for a second, just to kind of help you reason through this, radians would be, this is 0, right? If you go halfway across, that's like 3.14. Well, approximately half is 1.5. Right? This is about 1.5, about 3. And then here, if you'll do me a favor on your calculator and do 3 pi radians, this is about 4.7, 4.5, however you want to look at it. This is about 4.7, and all the way back around would be how much? 2 pi, which is 6.28. So this time, instead of using 0 and 360, we're going to use 0 all the way to 6.28. Does that make sense? Other than that, guys, exactly the same. Same lesson. Okay? So it's a really good way today to just plain old practice what we learned Friday. For your first problem, let's give it a shot, see what we remember. I'm going to ask you for tangent of x, and I'm going to tell you equals negative 1.5. Tangent of x equals negative 1.5. So step 1, because you see an x there instead of a theta, you want to make sure your calculator is in radians. And on the quiz, you will be divided into 2 parts. The first part will all have thetas. The directions will change. And they'll say, okay, guys, now do 0 to 2 pi. You'll change your calculator over to radians, and then you'll do the second half. Does that make sense? So let's start with this one. The first thing you're going to need to do, remember, is to take the inverse of it. So tangent equals your answer. Okay. And in your calculator, when you find that answer, think about tangent. And I don't know what you remember from Friday, but remember, tangent is positive in 1 and 3 and negative in 4 and 2. So when you build this, tangent, remember, is also a straight line. These are your 2 angles. When you find it, did you get negative 0.98? So when you type this in your calculator, you're going to get negative 0.98. It's not degrees. So now you have to find 2, because it wants it to be between 0 and 2 pi, so no negative answers. So therefore, x equals, we're going to start with this one. And kids still sometimes are confused. Why am I subtracting sometimes and sometimes I add? You have to look at the picture. That's why I draw the picture, to help you out. I know that from the start all the way to here is 3.14. And I also know the yellow is 0.98, so I have to back up, right? When you back up, you subtract. So that means that this is 3.14 minus 0.98. That would be this first line here, which I got 2.16.
Yep.
Not a degree, because it's radian. Now let's find the other answer. We're going to start at 0, and this time we're going to go all the way to the second line. Okay, if I travel all the way around, I will be at 6.28. I know the yellow region, so I would back up. So this is 6.28 minus 0.98 again, which is 5.3. Number 2. Number 2 calls for the secant of x equaling 2.5. Remember me telling you about flipping. The only time you flip is when you see the word secant, cotangent, and cosecant. You don't flip for an inverse. The inverse just flips x and y, your domain and range. It doesn't take the reciprocal. So then I have secant. The reciprocal of secant starts with an s, so I start with c. So cosine of x equals, and now this is 1 over 2.5. Even. Now let's take the inverse. So in your calculator, you're going to find this. I didn't flip it. Find it in your calculator for me. How many radians is it? And let's draw a picture. When is cosine positive? When is x positive? It's my x-axis. So you're positive here and here. You drew yourself. What did you get? 1.16, right? It's nice when you get a positive. You don't have to do as much work. So x equals 1.16. Now your job is to find the other one. I'll give you a second. Look at the picture to help you decide if you're going to add or subtract. Don't. You've got to start trying to figure that out for yourself. I'm going to start at 0 and travel all the way. We're in radians. So you're going to do 6.28 and back up 1.16. So the answer should have been 5.12. Agree? Like I said, today's just basically a review of yesterday. There's a few we're going to throw in there a little bit harder. Let's try number 3. Cosecant of x equals negative 1.4. Are we going to flip? How come? Are we going to flip it? How come? Because it's cosecant. So the reciprocal cosecant is c, so we're going to start with an s. So sine of x equals, and I'm just going to make it simple. Okay, I'm going to put 1 over negative 1.4. So the inverse draw your picture. Think about what your picture looks like. Where's your, is it a V or a straight line? It's the V because it's not tangent. And it tells me y is negative. In other words, you're going to travel down your unit circle down. Like you're going to travel down to here. Which means it's going to put me here and here. So that's the reason it makes it V. I got negative 0.8 the first time, right? Fortunately. You gotta find 2. Okay, guys, focus. You gotta learn how to do this. It's on the quiz tomorrow. So now then, I'm gonna give you a second to find the 2 x's. Look at your picture, decide if you're gonna add or subtract. You have to find 2. When it gives you a negative the first time, you're in charge of finding 2 more. I got 3.94 and 5.48. Everybody comfortable with that, or have a question on how I got one or the other? Traveled from here past 3.14 and 0.8 more. And the other one I traveled all the way around, and I would need to back up a little. So 6.28 minus 0.8.
So if it's above the x-axis, you subtract it from 3.14. Like depending on it on the first line, if it's on the.
If it had been here, it just kind of depends on the picture.
Right, that's what I was asking. Like if it's on the, like if it's in the second quadrant, then you
can't say yes because there is a problem or two where it depends on what angle you got. So you have to just look at the picture. If I'm trying to get from the start to this line, I just think about it. I'm going to travel all the way to 3.14, and I know the yellow part is 0.8, so plus 0.8 more. You just kind of have to look at the picture. But for the most part, what you're saying is yes. Number 4. Three cotangent of x divided by 4 plus 1 equals 0. This one's kind of fancy. Problem's the same, it's just getting it
I don't like it.
whittled down.
I don't like that fraction.
Well, let's get rid of the fraction.
Yeah.
What's the first step? Do we get rid of the 4 or the 1?
One.
The 1. Okay, so move the 1 over to begin with, so minus 1. So now you're left with 3 cotangent of x over 4 equals negative 1. Then what are you going to do? Get rid of the 4 by multiplying by 4. Now you're left with 3 cotangent of x equals negative 4. Now what?
That was a negative 4.
This was a negative 1. I moved the 1 over.
Oh, that's right.
Divide by 3. See, y'all were worried about fractions and now they're gone. Now I've got cotangent. Cotangent is not an option, so what are we going to change it to? Tangent. And what else are we going to do when we change it to tangent? We're going to flip it. We don't change the sign, because if cotangent is negative, tangent is negative. Right? Because all tangent is y divided by x. So the signs aren't going to change. Negative divided by negative is still positive. Or positive divided by negative is still negative. My picture is, well, let's finish. I'll remove it up, I ran out of room. So we're going to take the inverse of negative 3/4. That's going to give me the x. I'm giving you an outside value. I want to know what radian we're at. Tangent is negative. When you typed it in your calculator, you got negative 0.64, right? So again, you've got to find 2. I'll give you a second to try to find them both.
So we put the inverse tangent of 3, negative 3/4 in the calculator.
This.
Yeah.
And you should have gotten negative 0.64.
Oh, it should be in reading then.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay. There's an x. Hey, look, there's an x, you're in radian. There's a theta, you're in degree. Because I want radian up. Should have gotten 2.5 and 5.6. Is everybody getting it, kind of? Can we give it another second or move on? There's only 6, so we're almost finished. We have 5 and 6 left. Move the 2 over. That you wanted to get this alone. So move the 2 over first. So you'll have 3 sine of x equals 2. You do minus 2 on both sides. Then divide everything by 3. So now you're at sine of x equaling 2/3. In your calculator, then the inverse of 2/3 will free x, right? In other words, I'm giving you an output, you're giving me the input. You've got your picture. Sine is 2/3. When is y positive? Y is positive up here. So you'll have a little more than half are going to land here and here. Which gives you these two angles. I know it's confusing. You don't take the reciprocal. The -1 just means I gave you outside, you give me inside. That's all it means. -1 does not mean you flip it to 3/2. When you typed it on your calculator, you should have gotten 0.73, right? Which actually gave us one of our answers. We only had to find one this time. I'm going to find it. 3.14 and back up 0.73. So I got 2.41. The last one gets like a triple star. It's hard. So if you've gotten this and you're doing great at it, then okay, this one's the one that kind of is the harder one. Write it down, I'll show you how to do it. Okay, everybody got it written down? Now, before I start out on this long road of explaining this problem, I would like to back up a little to a little bit of Algebra 2 and just remind you of a couple of things. If I told you x squared plus 7x plus 12, okay, and I had asked you to factor that. Remember, we want numbers that add to give me 7 and multiply to give me 12. Pay attention, because you're going to have to do this on your own within the next day or two anyways. So when you factor it, you would just open up a set of parentheses, and x goes here and here, right? And then you say, okay, what numbers add to give me 7 and multiply to give me 12? Well, the only ways to get 12 is 1, 12, 2, 6, and 3, and 4. So they're 3 and 4. Do I remember doing that? Okay, let me give you another one if you forgot. So what about x squared plus, sorry, I'm making it up. 8x plus 15. Let's do that one. What about factoring this in? This is just a refresher here for a second. You would set your parentheses open, right? Put your x's here. Your numbers that add to give me 8 and multiply to give me 15. What are factors of 15 that are going to add to give me 8? Good, 5 and 3. So plus 3 plus 5. Does that make sense? Do I remember how to factor? Okay. So what you're going to do when you see these problems is you're going to think that we're going to make it easy. We're going to ignore the tangents. We're just going to say, okay, what if I just had x squared plus, how many tangents do we have here? 2 plus 1. What if I just had that? That's a lot easier, isn't it? Factor that for me. Add to give me 2, multiply to give me 1. What goes here? X and x. What numbers am I going to use? There's only one way to get 1. How do you get 1? 1 times 1. What's 1 plus 1? 2, so it works. This problem is even easier because they're exactly the same, right? So now your answer, okay, now that I did my little thinking and I factored it, we've got to turn it back into this big mess now, right? So we had x plus 1. That's the same thing then as what I have is tangent of x plus 1 times tangent of x plus 1, right? Because if you're a FOIL this, tangent of x times tangent of x is tangent x squared. right? Y'all see it? So it's the same. But aren't these exactly the same? If they weren't the same, I would have 2 answers from this and 2 answers from this. So how many potential answers could we have in this kind of problem? 4. But because they're the same, then let's just solve one. So tangent of x plus 1 equals 0. What's my first step? What's my first step in solving? Move the 1 over. Now you're at tangent of x equals -1. Inverse of -1 is how much? Use your calculator. What'd you get? No, I got -0.79. Is that what you got? Okay, draw your picture. When is tangent negative? So you end up with 2.35 and 5.49. If it were another one, you'd have to solve it again and get the other 2 answers. So this can have potentially 4 answers. That's why I put a star around those over here. So all done for today. You can work on your worksheet now.